All right, David, thanks so much for joining the Liberty Ventures podcast today.
It's great to be with you.
So, you're from Washington, D.C. Early on in the Motley Fool, when Amazon went public, you recommended to people that they buy Amazon, did very well if they listened to your advice. And I know you've met Jeff Bezos a couple of times. So, I'm really curious to get your reaction to an announcement he just made today that as the owner of the Washington Post, he wants the newspaper now to focus on personal liberties and free markets. Uh, Curious what do you think about that?
That's a wild announcement. I am in Wilmington, North Carolina right now, kind of at the beach with a little bit of a beach mentality, Alexander. So I'm out of the loop, not realizing that just happened. But I mean, I would say on the one hand, I think it's great for somebody who owns something to be in control of it and deciding to do what he wants to with it. And so I completely back Jeff in terms of his interest there. I know a bunch of people who work at the Washington Post. They generally don't like it when their bosses tell them how to do what they do. And I also see that dramatic tension, that friction between business and editorial. So I'm sure that's going to create a little consternation. But overall, a little bit more freedom in this world, a little bit more focus on liberty, which I think is one of America's five core values and doesn't get played up enough. I'm generally supportive of that.
When you say one of America's five core values, do you have those five values at the top of your head?
I do. And, it's something that really matters a lot to me. And I'm glad we're going there. I wasn't expecting to spend time there. But if you don't mind, a lot of us do our core values for our organizations. We're used to doing that as professionals. If you've been part of a strategic planning exercise, you want to decide what are the values of this organization. You probably want to revisit them every 8 to 10 years, not too often. I feel like we should do that for our country. And I don't think there's a single answer, but it's my go-to question, especially when I'm having a conversation with somebody at a cocktail party, let's say, and I feel like we're in very different places. So it's a nice way to ask someone where they are by saying, what do you think America's core values are? It's an open-ended question. And I'm going to give you mine, but I'm not prescribing them. It's just having thought about it a lot, this is where I am. The first of my five America core values is liberty. That's first. That's how we started. That's why we started. And I think it's so important. So I know you do too. So the second is justice. And justice, of course, takes many forms, and we can look back over U.S. history and see when justice was not given, and the pain that many of us still feel today as a consequence. But justice, and being able to trust the other person when you shake hands on a business agreement, the lack of corruption in the United States relative to so many other economies worldwide, justice. The next one is enterprise, because, of course, business, free markets, the private sector is much larger, always has been in this country, than the public sector. And that's such a strength. And we are the greatest economy the world's ever seen. And it's because of enterprise and entrepreneurship and unleashing entrepreneurs. The fourth of my core values is resilience. And I think if you just think about being the world's longest standing, oldest democracy and the wars that's taken to uphold and the way we got it in the first place. And I would just say, unbelievable, greatest generation. There are so many great examples in American history. We prize people who are resilient and resilience. And then the final one, and this might be a surprise to some. I hope it isn't, because it feels to me like an American core value. Number five is kindness. We are among the most generous people in the world in terms of the amount that we give to philanthropy every year. And I think about people like Oprah Winfrey, who are real icons for our culture, who just emanate kindness. And I try to do that as well. And I think we all should. And some of my lack of interest in politics these days stems from the last 20 years or so, Alexander, where negative campaigning was something like 20% of TV ads 25 years ago and is up to 90% for political campaigns today. That's anti-American in my mind, because when I think of what are our core values, the things that are opposite those things to me are anti-American. And so being contemptuous of our fellow man, especially of our countrymen, is something that I highly disdain. So liberty, justice, enterprise, resilience, kindness. That's what I've come up with in my 58 years so far, and I'm always welcome to hear yours or change mine up as time changes.
I love that you've given this so much thought that you have those ready to go and give a several minute answer explaining the values of America, David. So, first off, just thank you. I think those are all on point. And the one thing I'll add in that I've really noticed from my travels around the world is optimism. There is a certain sense of optimism to America and people who are American that interestingly doesn't always exist in other countries. Of course, there are optimists in other places, but it ties in with everything else you're talking about, where part of our DNA is the sense that the future can be better and we can make it better, which leads us to promoting values like liberty and justice, and then having the resilience to see it through, a sense of kindness and actually making the world better by helping other people out, which starts to get into the nature of capitalism and conscious capitalism, especially finding those win-win-win solutions. But that's the only thing that I would add in that I think is also fundamentally a core value of America.
And I completely agree. And, at a certain point, you want to have a certain number. I've tried to keep it to 5, but 6 is okay. Once you start going beyond that, people start forgetting. Like, if you ask your employees to remember their core values and you're having to laminate it because you have too many. But let me make it clear. That could easily be number 1, Alexander. So I don't think that there's a perfect airtight list, but that we're having that conversation, that you just shared that. I totally agree with you. In fact, my last investing book, which comes out a little bit later this year, which I put my heart into last year as I wrote it, Rule Breaker Investing, has a paean to optimism right near the end in a way that I hope is emotional for the reader and reminds us of why we invest, and that being resilient, by the way, with the stock market, which is so rewarding for those who have either the guts or vision or willingness to do it, to buy and to hold for long periods of time. You have to be optimistic to keep your money invested. And by the way, it's incredibly well rewarded. The stock market averages 9 to 11% returns annualized for decades now, which reminds us optimism is paid off. But as you're pointing out, it's also, by the way, effloresced. So as America does better, as our stocks go up, as we become more profitable in so many ways and prosperous, not everybody and not all the time, of course. In 1 year and 3, the market drops. But as those things happen, that only strengthens the optimism, the positivity that flows from better business and better patient ownership.
100%. Now, David, you've written more books than I actually know. You probably have the number off the top of your head, but they each offer something really interesting about investing or the way to think about business. What's different about the latest book that you're about to come out with here?
Well, I have written 8 or 9 books, and I should say I've written 8 or 9 half books, because almost always I've been paired with my brother Tom, and we've co-written The Motley Fool Investment Guide, our first book, or You Have More Than You Think, our second, and others. And but first of all, let me just say I've loved doing that. It's always been fun to write those, and we haven't written one for quite a long time, which is part of the reason that I'm excited about this one. I think our last book was maybe 2010. As a business, as The Motley Fool has grown, the idea of a book deal, even a multi-book deal, became early days so exciting from Simon & Schuster and such a big thing for our company. But as we grew bigger and became sort of a 6-figure revenue company, books mattered less and less, and we just stopped doing them altogether. In the same way we used to do an NPR radio show, and now we just do it all through our website or our podcast these days, just like you're doing yours. And I'm so pleased to be joining it. So I would say, Alexander, I haven't written a book for a long time, and I've never written a book myself. And
Well, congratulations going out on your own with this.
Thank you. And this is an opportunity, most of all, for me now to look back over the 30 years that I've picked stocks at the Motley Fool, and really, rather than suppose something might work in our early books in the 1990s, saying, this is what we believe, this is what we're going to do, now I can say 30 years later, this is what we did, and this is how it did, and this is what we can learn, and this is what really works. And by the way, these things don't work. And so it is, I think, just a beautiful connection between the past, where I took lots of actions as a younger person, and then because we tend to buy and not sell, now we're in the present, which is decades later, and we can see what happens if you show, I would say, a willingness to break the rules of how investing is traditionally imagined or practiced, especially at big scale by Wall Street today, and do it differently. Do it, capital F, foolishly, with a gesture cap jingle and a willingness to take risk and find people like Jeff Bezos in early days when everybody said, do you remember this, Alexander? That company will never make money. It's completely overvalued, Amazon.bomb, the list goes on. That's not the only stock that I've picked and held over time. And once you start developing a pattern recognition that when people say something is dramatically overvalued, like Amazon or like Tesla or like Netflix back in the day, mailing DVDs out, that's actually an incredibly powerful buy signal, which is completely contrary to the way the markets are covered or the way most analysts or professional managers invest. So, yeah, I'm a rule breaker. I've been practicing this very unusual approach for 30 years now, and I get to lay it all out with full numbers now after 30 years.
So obviously, we want everyone to go and buy the book when it comes out. But as a teaser for that, what would you say is the number one thing you recommend people not do? Perhaps that's defying the rules, and the number one thing to do when thinking about investing,
Number one
whether
thing not
they're starting or they're experienced. Yeah.
Number one thing not to do, trade. Now, a lot of people, when they hear the word trade, they think, well, that's what you do to buy a stock. You buy a stock, that's a trade. And then you sell, that's a trade. But when I say trade, I mean buy, sell, buy, sell, buy, sell. Too many people think as soon as they bought something, they need to have a target price, or they hear a phrase, killingly bad phrase that we've all heard before, but I really don't like this one. Buy low, sell high. The secret to making money in the market, we're often told. And while I understand kind of the intention of that phrase, as soon as you buy, you're immediately being told to think about selling and selling high. And really, Alexander, the opposite of trading is investing. And investing is when you buy and then you add some more and you add some more. And when you have new money every 2 weeks, we hope, from your salary check, you're all ready to add it again, maybe to one of your existing positions or maybe a new one, but not to think that you're jumping in and jumping out of the same stocks over time. If you listen to CNBC, you'll hear a lot of voices telling you to jump in and jump out. It certainly serves the media with its clickbait headlines, as well as Wall Street with its transactional fees. But if you're buying a great company like Amazon, there was no day you should have sold it over the last 30 years. The stock is up over 1,000 times in value since we first picked it. There were times where it lost half its value, and that could happen next year. But if you're really in it to win it for the only term that counts, the long term, if you're investing over the course of your life, which is what investing means to me, then the opposite of that is trading, and you will so damage your ability to compound your returns if you interrupt by jumping in and jumping out or trying to think, oh, the market looks high, I should get out altogether. So this is the number one thing that most people make the mistake of. And so I'm here to say, don't trade unless you're just buying some more. And then, the question naturally is, well, then what? And the answer is, well, a few decades later, you could start selling to retire or buy that second house or go around the trip. Go around the world on a trip or put your kids through college. Those are the reasons that we actually invest. It's not to jump in and jump out of the markets, even though the markets are treated that way by the media, especially on cable TV. And it's kind of a tragedy when you think of how many Americans have been led to believe that they should just be jumping in, jumping out, worried about where the market's going to be this fall. When we're there for, I hope, if you're living well, 80, 100 years over the course of your life, you should be invested all the way through and enjoy the benefits of those compounding returns. I think I answered the first part of yours by saying don't trade. I think you asked something like, what is something you should do? And I would just give a short answer to that one for now, unless we want to go deeper. And that is, you should pursue excellence. When you're investing your own money that you've earned, I would suggest you find the best companies of our time and invest in them. I wouldn't suggest you just follow whatever your broker's saying or somebody at the water cooler says, have you heard about this crypto stock or meme stocks? I would say, what is the company that means the most to you in this world? For me, I would probably say it's Amazon, because Amazon has saved me so much time. I hate shopping, and it's just unbelievable how much, just as one person, that I benefited from Amazon, and that is true, magnified across the globe for so many of us who take probably e-commerce for granted these days. But I'm old enough to remember a world before e-commerce even existed. So I would just say that that's a great example for me of the stock I should have in my portfolio. And each of us has companies like that in our lives we should be invested in. There are many others I could bore you with right now, but that's a quick example.
So those are great lessons to start with. Now, you've been investing for decades, as you said, and I'm actually really curious. Is there anything that you recommended or thought was going to be successful in the early days of the Motley Fool and the advice you were giving out that you were surprised to learn over time wasn't actually the right strategy?
I mean, sure, there are all kinds of different bad investments I've made. That's really important, and I make a big point in my new book about talking about my losers because if you're going to take more of a venture capitalist's approach to the stock market, you're willing to lose. You need to be willing to lose to win. So, in order to pick and hold Amazon or pick and hold NVIDIA, and if I may brag ever so slightly, there's a beautiful coincidence that's occurred in 2025 because of stock splits in recent years. My cost basis for Amazon stock is the same as my cost basis for NVIDIA stock. Both of them are 16 cents. So these are two of the great stock picks I'll ever make of the past generation. And so our cost basis of 16 cents for both is amazing. And how many other stocks did I need to pick through and miss or just blow and in order to have those part of it as well? For example, I somehow once managed to lose 95% on my recommendation to Motley Fool members of Krispy Kreme donut. That was back in
Mm.
the 1990s, turning into the aughts. The company was went public and was fraudulently managed for a time, the time that I happen to have recommended the stock. Alexander said, now that's still an American brand that counts for something today, although it's getting eviscerated right now by Dunkin' Donuts, which had a really strange Super Bowl ad. But anyway, so that's just a quick example of like, I have certainly picked many bad stocks and been willing to sit there and watch something lose 75% of the value. And, other quick examples, I mean, I can think back to AOL was one of my great stock picks the first 10 years. But where's AOL today? So it was a 150 bagger for Motley Fool members back in the day, me too. But then with the merger with Time Warner in 2001, it just started to fall apart and fade. And a lot of those gains were lost. Or just think about a company like Yahoo. Yahoo used to be on top of the world, and then Google showed up. Yahoo was the search engine of the internet before Google. So I think you have to be aware of lots of different promising companies that look great, but you buy them and things don't play out your way. And sometimes you're still holding all the way down, or sometimes maybe you've moved away or you've sold off part of it to buy something else. But I think it's very important, Alexander, for anybody who invests in the stock market, which, by the way, everybody should invest in the stock market, buying companies that we know directly. It's so enriching in so many ways. It's important to be able to lose and to recognize that 1 year in 3, the market will go down. And probably 4 or 5 stock picks out of 10 will underperform the market. And about half of yours will out or overperform. But the key to close this Shaggy Dog answer, the key is that the ones that win really win, that you hold, Tesla, Netflix, NVIDIA, Amazon, Intuitive Surgical, Shopify, The Trade Desk. The list goes on. I don't want to just say Amazon and NVIDIA because there are so many wonderful rule breaker winners. These stocks, when they go up 10, 50, 100 times in value, a single 100 bagger wipes out every bad stock pick that I've ever picked. Literally. Literally. I have picked that 95% that I lost on Krispy Kreme sounds horrific until you realize that this other stock went up 38 times in value, and so it just completely wipes the floor of, I don't even remember my Krispy Kreme. I needed you to ask me the question to go back there. So it's very important to understand the math of winning in the market, and that is you can make infinite upside. You have very limited downside, but most people live in fear of the downside.
And just to put numbers on that, so imagine you put $1,000 into Krispy Kreme and you lose 95% of it. Well, you're down to $50 at the end of that. But if you also put $1,000 into one of those 38 baggers, that turns into 38,000. And so the upside is so much bigger than what you lost on the Krispy Kreme.
Thank you for making the math plain. A lot of people, I'm sure, grokked it right away, and then a lot of other people aren't as math interested, and I'm so glad you did that. I should have done it. But yeah, think about those two stocks. I mean, it sounds horrible. Most people, again, live in fear of a stock going down 10 or 25%, let alone 50% or 95%. until you start to realize that if you build a portfolio of 20 plus stocks, some of them are going to lose, some will win. If you find companies that are great companies, that are rule breakers specifically, not every stock, the ones that I talk about on my podcast or in my book, Rule Breaker Investing, we're looking at the rule breakers, the top dogs, Alexander, and the first movers in important emerging industries. That is trait number one of rule breaker companies. That's Tesla. It's not Nikola, which, by the way, I would call a faker breaker. You may have seen Nikola, bankrupt this month. A really questionable startup that tried to look like Tesla. So you need to be able to discern the Teslas from the Nikolas. But with that said, yeah, the winners just keep going up over time. And that's what a lot of people don't understand, especially if they listen to fast money cable TV that tells them to sell as soon as something has gone up or gone up 20 or 50%. They'll never experience the 10-bagger.
So, David, these are all incredibly insightful points. And for anyone who doesn't know you, this is just emblematic of how strategically you think about things. And as we wrap this up, one of the ways I know that you also apply that strategic mind is to games. You just love board games. So I'm curious, what are you playing over at the beach on your trip now? Because I'm sure there's something, and you always have these unique games that I've never heard of.
Well, thank you. I think my favorite game in recent years is Terraforming Mars, which I know Elon Musk for real wants to do one day, although probably not in Elon's lifetime. But Terraforming Mars is one of the great strategy games of the last 15 years or so. And you can find it on Amazon. You can find it in geeky game stores that I go to. It's an example of a game that is sort of an economic simulation with a huge stack of cards. Every card in the deck is unique. Each one has a cost, and they all involve the different things humanity would need to do one day to terraform Mars. So, for example, to generate heat on the planet, which is important for heating it up because it's a little bit farther away from the sun than we are, examples would be like blasting asteroids into Mars, creating heat that then gets captured in greenhouse ways. So that there's a card for that. There are, again, hundreds of cards. Some of them feel like sci-fi, but ultimately what you have is sort of a card drafting, tableau building card game that is infinitely replayable because you don't play all of the cards each time. You don't get through that whole big fat deck of cards. And you can play with 1 to 5 people. Yes, you can play solo. And it is just a phenomenal game. I have, I think, 678 board games in my house. I think I know that because I have a spreadsheet that I keep them all on. So let me be clear. I'm not One Note Sally here with board games. That just is the one that comes to mind. But there's so many wonderful games. I gave a technical one, but a very accessible party-oriented game like So Clover. I would completely recommend to everybody listening if you haven't already found So Clover. What a delightful cooperative word game you can play with generally 2 to 4 people. And completely recommend that. Takes 20 minutes to play and a lifetime to master. So I love, just like the word motley is right in the middle of my company's name, motley meaning many colored, that jester garment worn of yore. I have a motley approach to many things. I try to pick lots of different types of stocks, although I try to make them rule breakers just for many different industries. And I try to love lots of different types of games as well because there are so many different people out there, and matching the right game to the right person and enjoying that for an evening or a lifetime is a real pleasure for me. Thank you for asking me about my second favorite hobby.
Well, learning what games I should be buying and playing is one of my pleasures whenever we talk. So I'm going to go and get both of those on Amazon as soon as we're done this, David. Really. Thank you for the suggestions and for all the advice and your friendship over the years. I'm so excited for your new book to come out soon.
Well, thank you very much, Alexander. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for allowing me to game evangelize at the end as well. But I really appreciate that opportunity to think about what are America's core values up front. Because, again, don't listen to Alexander. Don't listen to me. Come up with your own list. But it's a great conversation to have with anybody, whether it's at a bus stop waiting for a bus or a cocktail party or somebody that you care very much about. We all care so deeply about our country. There are so many amazing things about it. It's also under some stress, has been under a lot of stress in recent years. And I hope that we'll remember, just like we try to remember the values that guide us personally or corporately, I hope we'll remember that nationally and have that conversation. So we got to share a little bit of that today. Full on, my friend.
Full on, David. Thank you.